KSAT studios. We are covering all of the runoff races here this evening. As we do most election nights, we are bringing you insight from the one and only Power Panel. We've got a lot of things to watch tonight.
Absolutely. Let's introduce the Power Panel, though,
Yes.
first. Kevin Wolf, City Councilman, County Commissioner, man of many hats.
Many hats.
Many hats.
I like that.
Molly Cox, consultant,
Yes.
wearing an exquisite Dolly Parton
a good
shirt.
one.
Looks like it came right from Dollywood.
It so weird. It did.
See, I know. DeMonte Alexander, consultant, has worked in both city and county government. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for being here.
All right, so we're going to look statewide, right? We're going to look statewide at all the races, kind of see if we see a trend, especially the school vouchers. But there are really three local races that we can focus on. And I didn't want to do this, but Myra wants to do predictions right off the top.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I was like, what? The merengue? What are you doing? What's
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it, Myra. Be
Yeah.
bold. Be bold.
Yeah, you know what he did. He just put it all on me. So we're going to start with you, Kevin. Any predictions you want to make before
All
we
right,
go?
so let's start at the top. I think Congressman Tony Gonzalez is going to win.
Give me a number.
What?
See,
Not just
he didn't
points.
predictions.
He didn't want to do it, though. Remember?
2 points. 2 points.
You're saying 52.
Yeah, it's going to be close.
Wow.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Then we'll move down a step into Kemple, right next door, state rep. I think he wins as well. I think it's going to be closer to 54 for him.
Interesting.
Okay.
And then here locally, Rebecca Clay-Flores. I think she pulls it out.
Taking on Amanda Gonzalez.
Takes out Amanda. You know, they've both been working very, very hard. It's been a very nasty race for them, but I think she does, and it'll be 53-54.
Interesting. All right, Molly.
I don't make
Are you
predictions.
copying down? Are you copying
I'm
down
gonna
his
because I want to be able to say like
No,
this.
she's
Wrong.
gonna check.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah,
incorrect.
Yeah, that's what I
Like,
thought you were doing.
Well, the last time we did this, I think
you did
yeah,
pretty well,
okay.
as did I think. You might have
You
done.
just said you don't do predictions.
I know, and that's why I do well, because I could say exactly what I predicted.
Yeah, exactly.
In my
That's
head.
exactly what
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah.
Exactly what I said was going to happen. All right, DeMonte.
I'm going to go up a little bit more. I'm going to give Tony about 55 and Rebecca the same.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kemple Schoolcraft.
I agree with Kevin on that race.
Interesting.
Okay. I think Gonzalez Herrera is going to be very tight. You guys said don't read anything into the fact that they're not having election night watch parties. I'm kind of reading something into that.
No,
I think
he said it.
neither one of them have a good feel
Yeah.
for what's going to happen tonight.
Well,
I think it's going to be really
Yeah.
What I look at is
51-49 one way or the other.
you look at the way how they got into the runoff. It's different if it's not like Kemple and Schoolcraft, right, where the incumbent's actually losing.
Yeah.
Rebecca and Tony has a pretty significant lead going into the primary. So, I mean, I get some of those votes are for, against, and all that stuff. I just think maybe because these are the only races we have, we're thinking about them a little bit too much.
Well, that's why the question I'm asking is, okay, so you look at Tony's number from the primary, and you look at everybody who voted against him,
Yeah. No, you're right.
he would lose.
That's saying that everybody who voted against him would vote against him again.
Yeah.
That mean Herrera.
Not
would have
only
to get
that, but everybody would turn out to
right.
vote again.
Number
that
one,
voted
turnout,
against him.
and number two, 100% go to Herrera.
Right.
I mean, you have to.
It doesn't work that way.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just laying it out there.
Hey.
You know, you guys are the
It's a-
experts.
it's-
I'm
it's
just
good.
I'm just a mere novice.
It's good logic. It's just flawed.
Okay, we want to back up here a second and hear from these candidates in these races. Tony Gonzalez and Brandon Herrera, that's District 23, which stretches from here to the edge of Texas, quite literally.
Edge of El Paso,
San
yeah.
Antonio, all the way to El Paso. You got a chance to talk to both of those candidates, and I believe we have some sound from them.
Brandon Herrera is 28 years old, and the only job he's ever had is a YouTuber. When I was 28 years old, I'd already been in the military 10 years. I'd already served in Iraq and Afghanistan 5 years. I already had 2 kids, and I was living my life. So age, is part of it. He just has no experience. He thinks being a comedian he's auditioning to be a comedian for Texas 23. That's not what our district needs nor wants. Our district needs to have a representative that shows up in good times and bad.
I just got really frustrated with the votes that my congressman was making. And I thought that, you know, you have a Texas Republican, that meant something, that he was going to be an actual conservative fighter. And especially with me being disappointed with some of the votes that he's made there, made me really start paying attention to some of the votes he was making in other places. And I realized that this is just not somebody who represents my values.
All right, so sitting down with both men,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of love lost.
No.
Tony Gonzalez and Brandon Herrera. I mean, they are very at each other. This is not a like, I'm going to respect him no matter what the outcome is. I don't think that's going to happen
Right.
in this race.
And one of those big issues that Herrera said he was unhappy with was Tony Gonzalez's vote after Uvalde.
Right.
And I mean, this is somebody who goes by the AK guy. He is a gun manufacturer. That's a big following that he has generated on YouTube. Tens of thousands of people follow him and you know, subscribe to that same thought. So with a district like this that has a place like Uvalde in it, the border as well, I mean, does it come down to just a few of those issues, you think?
I mean, in a primary runoff, you're basically looking at folks who are voter insiders, right? Like you're not necessarily getting a rampant group of humans who are ready to go out and vote in a primary runoff. So yes, those are the kinds of split hair issues that get folks jazzed to go out and vote, right? So if I am a subscriber to a YouTube channel and I really like this dude called the AK guy, he will get me in my car to get me to the poll, right?
Single issue.
It's usually single issue and it's usually very rampant, or very rabid about voting on that single issue.
Well, this is certainly a non-traditional race. I mean, you've got a YouTube host who's very into guns taking on a two-term congressman. I mean, I don't know that there's anything to really compare this race.
I mean, we had a reality TV star run for president, so
True,
I'm
but
just saying.
but he was a reality TV star on mass media.
You're saying 'cause YouTube. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
saying that this is social. This is like the advent of a different kind of candidate, I think.
Okay.
Well, I don't think it's a different kind of candidate. I think he's found a different way to
Get his
brand
message
and
out.
market himself in terms of his name ID and things like that. Obviously, the days of billboards all over the place are kind of dwindling. I mean, it's like a shotgun in the dark, right? But I mean, you have to give it to him. He's found a way to kind of break through with some voters.
Yeah.
Actually, the interview, I think I can sit through that interview, and he's looked like a completely different person when
Very
you interviewed
different,
him
yes.
than all the rhetoric you hear online and all that other stuff. He actually sounds like a very reasonable person.
That's the question I got from
yeah,
everybody after I did that interview. How was he? What was he like?
So
Was he confrontational?
So yeah, let me put a little different viewpoint on this. Social media has allowed a much larger number of completely unqualified people to have a chance.
Okay.
At the beginning of the interview with Tony Gonzalez, he started off with, "This guy's done nothing." Okay. If we were hiring you for a job, we would be looking at your experience, your ability to do something, blah, 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 blah. We don't get that in our elections anymore. We get the single issue pieces. Okay?
Well, and that's what I mentioned to you the other day about it. Almost the national politics is kind of overlaid local, right? It's
sure.
now what our leadership wants, what the governor wants. Everybody falls in line, and that's what we do, regardless of what's on your resume. Look at a la Steve Allison,
Yeah.
the hood race. You're seeing that a lot now.
Like I said, it's changed from, used to be the saying all politics are local.
Yeah.
That's not the way it is now.
It's not.
Not anymore.
Right. Well, I think it also
Molly
is.
just agreed with me.
I did ish.
We're going to
I
wrap
did
up this
ish.
live stream.
Hold on.
Take the win.
I did ish.
I did ish.
I did ish only because I do think that they're localizing those politics, right?
Yeah.
So how can we take something like an overlaid national conversation on guns, et cetera, and bring it so close to home in Uvalde, for example, right? So I can bring it very, very localized and make it make sense to the folks who are around me. So yes, to the national sort of rhetoric that's occurring, or the statewide rhetoric that's occurring, and even in this race, which is interesting. Not to fully take us off topic, but we were discussing earlier the notion of sort of Greg Abbott's influence, not on the ballot, but influencing the ballot, particularly with pro-voucher candidates, right? Spending $2 million in a primary runoff, right? And then separately, he's backing Gonzalez in this one. not the AK guy, Brandon Herrera, right? So that's a very sort of, and you've got like the Matt Gaetzes of the world backing Brandon Herrera. So if you're thinking about national versus statewide, so it's kind of a Tony Gonzalez, Brandon Herrera race is a different or interesting race comparatively to the rest of the ones that are going on right now.
Yeah, I think we've got some numbers. I think we got some early voting numbers.
Yeah, I believe our producer here said that we have, these are statewide? Is this still statewide, Landon? Okay,
Statewide,
so
yep.
statewide,
So that's statewide, that's done.
Oh yeah.
26% reporting
60-40.
is
Wow.
what it says right now, 60-40.
Who's right? Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm not calling, we're not calling this race right now.
Yeah,
but I mean,
nobody's calling it
it's
except for the
60-40,
panel,
but
apparently.
it's like 1,300 votes
Yeah, but
between them.
if you're at 54% or more on early vote,
Toast.
Yeah,
it's pretty much
toast.
done.
still, polls still
polls
open
are
in El
still
Paso.
open in El
Yeah, it's a
Paso.
good
He
point.
wants to pull. He wants
No,
to
I don't. I'm just saying, because if I remember right, in the primary, Tony got out to a big lead, and it just kept going, and he dipped below 50%. So,
Well, this is what I was saying earlier. Exactly what I was saying. We get wrapped up into these races sometimes. You look at the number of support he had going into after the general election, he still had a stronghold over that district,
yes.
right? And so this is what we talked about. A lot of those voters didn't go vote for Brandon Herrera, or they stayed home.
Right, exactly. I do have a question about 23 when we get a little farther, because I'm not ready to call it yet, even though you guys are.
Fair?
Well,
But I'm just,
we're just
Well, I
offering
caught him when I
the
walked through the
stuff
door,
that
so.
because
Molly's
we're
with you.
nerds. I'm like, hey, it's 60% is hard to overcome in an early vote.
I said
True.
55.
all right.
Yeah,
You
it's
did.
hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, do we have other early voting numbers? Do we have voting for Kemple and Schoolcraft and?
Is this the
Okay.
moment where you say stick around because
This is the
we'll do some
Republican
fun
Jay
stuff?
Furman, Liddy Lazaro Garza Jr. All right, we're just
That's
shuffling
who-
through
that's
them
who
right now.
Valdi-
Yeah, we're
Stephen
gonna scroll
Wright
through.
That's who
over
Valdi,
Michael
isn't it?
Rodriguez. This is State Rep
For
District
Valdi?
35. This is,
Is that Uvalde?
yeah, I think it's the,
Yeah.
I don't think it is Uvalde.
Okay,
Wow.
so
Yeah.
check this out. This is a race
This is
we
the
talked
one, yeah.
about
Oh.
during
He pulled
our
it out.
6:30
He's gonna
Q&A.
pull it out.
Dade
He pulled it
Phelan,
out.
we're missing some pictures here. Dade Phelan, Speaker of the House. That's a race that has been a big
Wow.
one to watch, not local, but obviously it's got implications
No,
for all
but-
of us across Texas. What do you make of this, Kevin?
Oh, that's far bigger than I expected, and this is a loss for the governor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know how else to say that. You know, not only is he an individual rep, but he's Speaker of the House.
Well, this was a guy who was targeted not only by the governor, he was targeted by the lieutenant
Yes.
governor,
Yes.
he was targeted by the AG,
Yeah.
he was
Yes.
targeted by
And then he
The
had
ag
the
commissioner.
support of some more, traditional Republicans
Yeah.
like Rick Perry,
Rick Perry,
like Joe
yes.
Strauss,
Yes.
coming behind him and saying, "We want this guy
Yeah.
to stay."
And he
Yes.
also survived the gaffe he had, but being
Sure.
under the influence,
Yeah.
Right.
survived that too. Now he is I think Beaumont hasn't had a lot of representation, and he represents Beaumont, correct?
Yes,
And so,
and
yeah.
I know that because I was stuck in a storm last week
Yeah.
in Beaumont.
Okay.
So I got a taste of this race and just how nasty this race was, just in the ads that you saw on Beaumont television
Yeah.
between these two, a sitting Speaker of the House and his challenger.
I would be interested to dive into the cross tabulations of this race because of all the implications. There's 43 committees that could have been shaken
Oh
up.
yeah.
Yep.
This could have been a huge race that flipped Texas in a direction that we probably wouldn't have been able to recover from.
All right, let's go to Alan Schoolcraft, John Kemple. I think we have those numbers now. And here we Schoolcraft, 55, John Kemple, 45. That's with 57% reporting. This was a race because Schoolcraft almost won it without a runoff. So this was a
Yeah.
race that I was wondering if Kemple could overcome the momentum that Schoolcraft clearly had.
And this was the race we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
the
Right.
measure of the governor's influence. This is
Yeah.
all about school vouchers.
Yep.
Alan Schoolcraft was last in Texas Congress in '93.
Yeah.
Something
in
along
the
those
late
lines.
80s to 93, and then he ran for Texas Senate and lost.
John Kemple, the incumbent, who doesn't support school vouchers, and that's that single issue that this race has come down to.
Well, you also saw,
No, go.
you also saw after the general, he was losing. It wasn't like a big gap like Tony and Rebecca is. he was actually behind in that race,
Yes.
which you can see that momentum push over.
I think we have Garrett Berger, who's with us now live from the Schoolcraft campaign, from their campaign watch party tonight. If we can go to Garrett live. I know we're doing this in an instant, so I appreciate it. All right, Garrett, I'm guessing that you got some good reaction there at the Schoolcraft party after they saw those early numbers come in.
You know, there wasn't any shouting or jumping for joy, but the mood's pretty light here. You can see everybody chatting happily, and those early results up on the board behind me. You know, it looks like a 10-point lead at this point with Schoolcraft up above the incumbent John Kemple. Now, Alan Schoolcraft was a state rep in the 80s and 90s, at the time representing districts in Bexar County. 31 years later, though, he's looking to go back to Austin, taking on John Kemple as the 44th district state rep these past 13 years. The race is largely boiled down to school vouchers, which Kemple, the incumbent, voted against. Schoolcraft says that was the final straw that drew him into the Republican primary, while Kemple has said he doesn't regret his stance on vouchers. And vouchers were also Governor Abbott's top objective this past legislative session, but they never actually made it to his desk. So the governor started painting targets on his opponent's backs, actually going after some of those sitting Republicans who had voted against his vouchers. Kemple was one of them, and Schoolcraft is the challenger that the governor supported. Wasn't the only big Republican name to do so, though. As you can see proudly on that banner behind him, he was also endorsed by Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump and a host of other big Republican names in the state of Texas. So he has had a bunch of Republican establishment support, even against a sitting incumbent. Now, with the governor pushing for school vouchers, that's going to be something to watch in this election. Many of the challengers that he supported in the original primary had already won outright. Several of those races, including Kemple's and Schoolcraft's, are on tonight. So the outcome could affect what we see in the next legislative session. Now, we haven't had a chance yet to swing by John Kemple's campaign, but we do know it's a smaller watch party. And if these numbers hold, we imagine it's probably going to be quite a bit more subdued than this one. Now live at Lake McQueen, I'm Garrett Berger, KSAT 12 News.
Thank you. Thank you, Garrett, for that update. Really appreciate it there. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this was a race that, the governor obviously threw his support behind Schoolcraft. In the primary, we saw a lot of races with candidates backed by the governor. They went in the way of those candidates. The incumbents lost.
Yeah.
Steve Allison, one example. But people were seeing ads day in and day out with the governor's face on it saying, this is who I support. I wondered if that would wane at all between March and now, but in this race, doesn't seem like it has.
I actually thought it would.
I thought it would.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah.
And I kind of make a different, like the Steve Allison, Mark LaHood race. So many people came up to me afterwards and said, I really thought Steve was going to win. That's why I didn't vote.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, okay, maybe Kemple's onto something here, and if he can just hang on and take it to a runoff, maybe he's got a chance. But that's 30-some% of the vote that we have right now, and that's a significant lead by Alan Schoolcraft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the history in that district, Edmund Kemple, John Kemple's father, held that seat before he did, and I want to say that seat has been held by a Kemple for 40 years. I mean, we're talking about a changing of the guard.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing there.
Yeah. But DeMonte brought something up earlier that I think is very, very telling, and every politician says it. You got to get your vote out. Yeah. Well, Schoolcraft got his vote out. Yes, the governor, those types of things. This is a win for the governor as it is for Schoolcraft. The unfortunate part is it got the negative vote out. It's who was fired up enough to get up and go out and vote in the runoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think school vouchers is a thing. Like that's such a thing here in Texas right now.
Yes. Right.
And to be fair, right, if we're talking about these sorts of races, we've got 6 incumbents that were voted out during the March primary. We have 5 now in a runoff that Governor Abbott has backed, again, with like over $2 million in a runoff, after $6 million in the primary. So that was a lot of dollars put behind some candidates who are pro-voucher, and he's hoping, with his fingers crossed, that he'll pick up 2 races tonight, right?
Yeah, this is all a numbers game.
It
to
is.
set up the legislature to be pro-school voucher.
That's right.
I'm also wondering if Governor Abbott's support is more, it weighs more on different issues, like you have the vouchers versus guns versus border.
Yeah, right.
Right, you're not
Right.
seeing that
No, right.
impact more in that, but this, to Molly's point, this voucher thing is so charged
It is.
right now.
Well,
And,
I
yeah.
mean, remember, he went around the state talking about vouchers.
Yeah.
Like it has consumed sort of Texas politics, and because it was so fraught in the last legislature, he could not get it where he wanted it to be. He turned all of his attention to the races that are going on right now.
I see a KSAT
Consume
explains
Texas
coming up.
politics.
There you go. KSAT explains.
I see a KSAT explains coming up for vouchers.
To your point, consume Texas politics, but I wonder, is it really consuming, the thoughts of the people actually going out to vote?
Well, or not voting.
Or not voting.
Yeah, right. Like
Is this a top issue for voters?
Yeah, and I mean, life tells us no. Right? Like,
I mean, we've been part of this. If you do a poll right now, I don't think vouchers is in the top 5 or top 4. If you poll Bexar County, it's public safety, transportation, all those, and then vouchers will probably creep in there somewhere. But to your point, it's charged right now because it's all we're talking about. But I think if you poll this, it's not one of the top issues that everyday citizens
well, and I'm
are.
thinking about how all of these things are like kind of interlinked, right? So if we're just talking about Bexar County and we're thinking about school vouchers and how that is also linked to what public schools and parent choice, et cetera.
Yeah.
And we just saw in Northeast Independent School District a swing far, far away from that, where it was very much student focused, very much about folks being elected that were very focused on student success and did not want anything to do with sort of culture wars of banning books, et cetera, right? So there's just such it seems to be sort of top of mind, what is the thing that sort of salient point that people can drive home. And I think in this particular race, it is literally school vouchers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, now, we don't have numbers for Precinct 1 yet, but I know that our Dylan Collier does. I know he is live out. I believe he's at the Rebecca Clay-Flores campaign watch party. Of course, she's taking on Amanda Gonzalez, and he is at Dr. Amanda Gonzalez's headquarters right now. Dylan, if you can hear us, our system seems to have a little snafu in it. So what numbers do you have from this race?
Steve, after the early vote, the incumbent Rebecca Clay-Flores has 64% of the vote, just over 1,900 voters. And Gonzalez, who is looking to unseat her, came in with 36% of the vote, 1,009 votes. So nearly 900 vote difference after the early vote and absentee votes had been counted. So I think that might explain why this is one of the most subdued and quiet watch parties that I've ever been to in covering politics for close to 20 years. It'd be very difficult based on the voter turnout for Gonzalez to turn this around and come back from such a huge deficit after getting out of the March primary in second place and forcing Clay-Flores into a runoff.
Kevin Wolf and DeMonte Alexander and Molly Cox were all talking about how charged this race has been, Dylan. And I mean, we've even seen it from a complaint standpoint. I mean, Dr. Gonzalez just filing an ethics complaint against Rebecca Clay-Flores for some of her mailers that she sent out.
Yeah, there were a number of quotes that Clay-Flores attributed to leaders in Bexar County, the head of the San Antonio Police Officers Association, the mayor of one of the San Antonio suburbs, that have now been called into question whether or not those people actually used that verbiage, whether or not they had actually endorsed the commissioner for a second term in office. So yeah, that generated an ethics complaint filed by Gonzalez in the last 10 days with the Texas Ethics Commission. And that was just the latest sort of layer to this race, which had really stayed off of the radar until the month of May. We had a story on KSAT a couple weeks ago about Gonzalez and her former employer, the San Antonio Police Officers Association, going back and forth over the creation of these meeting minutes. They were going to apply to the Texas Lottery Commission's charitable bingo to try and get some proceeds from bingo events. There were accusations that Gonzalez was forced to create meeting minutes and then present those to the state. And that's an organization that SAPOA eventually distanced itself from and never submitted the application over questions about the veracity of those records. Then you had Clay-Flores, who has been backed by the Texas Organizing Project, which is a pretty socially progressive political advocacy group. All of a sudden, she gives $30,000 in her discretionary funding to Blue Cares, which is the nonprofit arm of SAPOA, which was sort of made for strange political bedfellows here in the closing months of this election. So just a lot of different storylines at play, but it appears at the end of all of that, you're going to have the incumbent hang on for a second term in office.
Yeah, and I know there were also some allegations that there were some robocalls that perhaps were, targeting Clay-Flores that weren't 100% above board, and it's been a back and forth, like you said, really just for like the last month and a half in this race. And by the way, the numbers we just popped up were not the right numbers. Dylan, the numbers you have are the right numbers. Give us those numbers again before we let you go.
So after the early vote and absentee votes were counted, the incumbent Rebecca Clay-Flores has 64% of the vote. Looked like 1,911 votes total, and Dr. Amanda Gonzalez had 36% of the votes, so 1,009 votes total, which means that Gonzalez will have to make up at some point tonight, if she has any hopes of overtaking Clay-Flores, will have to make up about 900 votes.
Yeah, now we've got the right numbers up there. All right, Dylan, thank you very much. It'll be interesting to see what Commissioner Clay-Flores has to say later, because there were some of the allegations against her not being involved, not going to community meetings, that she took very personally in this whole thing.
That's that's something we've heard a lot before the primary. DeMonte, Kevin, this one is a prediction. Stars in your columns for that one. You talked about how this DeMonte was all about numbers in terms of the number of people that ran against Rebecca Clay-Flores in the primary.
Yes.
They ran viable campaigns.
Right.
You weren't surprised this was headed to a runoff?
No, not at all. I mean, you could be one of the most popular candidates in the county, and you have 5 or 6 candidates run against you that actually run viable campaigns, that raise money, that have campaign organizers. It's hard for anybody to, not go into a runoff under those circumstances. And so for her to still get 46% with that. That's still a strong showing with that number of candidates. And
am I correct that this race got ugly?
It got very nasty, and it's what and also I always preach about this. I think Bexar County kind of just doesn't take well to nasty politics. We they don't like it, and that could be a factor into this race as well. But it got really nasty. There's a point where you wanna attack someone on their voting record or on their credentials and things like that. But I think there's a line that was crossed in this campaign, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it was interesting just for me, the allegations against Rebecca Clay-Flores that she wasn't showing up to community meetings, that she wasn't responsive to her constituents. She took that she basically said those are lies.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm quoting her when I say that. I mean, she came out and said it's not true.
Well, the numbers say she was telling the truth.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, so I really want to hear what she has to say tonight, because I, despite the 5 candidates that were running against her, I think she thought she wasn't going to go to a runoff.
I agree. I definitely think the runoff threw her. I don't know that she would have I know she understood five candidates against you. That's a pretty big thing, but.
Well, she is a new candidate, right?
Right.
She's a brand new candidate.
Sure,
There's a lot of learning curve that happens. Not saying she didn't know, but giving her the benefit of the doubt, she is brand new to the candidate. There's a lot to understand about how all this stuff works.
Sure.
Right? And so I could say that probably how hard she thought she worked.
Yes.
And the hospital that she brought to the district and those types of things, she thought, well, how could I ever go to a runoff?
Yeah.
But not thinking about, hey, these other candidates actually ran great campaigns.
Which is,
as well.
which is, I'm not saying that it was right or wrong.
No,
I'm just,
sure.
and actually, in a way, I'm saying it's human nature.
Right.
That you work so hard and you're doing all this, not for yourself, but for your district, and then you find out your district doesn't give you 50%. I mean, that's got to be disheartening in a certain way.
I say this to every candidate, everyone who serves in office. There's two skill sets. There's the skill set and the science behind knowing how to run for office. And then there's the skill set of actually doing the job if you get
Right.
elected.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you personally, I think Rebecca did both of those well. Okay? And I think
He's giving you snaps, by the way.
and I think you know, her coming into this first reelection campaign, you know, she knew she did the job well, and she expected that to be the carrying thing. And so, to Molly's point, I do think she was surprised. But I agree with DeMonte, when you have a large number of candidates that actually know the science behind running for office,
Yeah.
it's going to make a dent, especially when it's your first reelection time. If she continues to do the job that she's doing for her constituents,
numbers will show
you
up.
won't see this next time.
Yeah, you won't see 5 people.
You won't
running
see
against
five.
you.
And this makes her stronger. She's
Yeah.
she's going to learn a lot from this race, for good and for the things that she's not doing so well. She's going to learn how to better herself on those things. So.
Yeah.
Hi. I just was going to see if you wanted to add something to it.
I always try to leave air for Molly. I wait for Molly
She's
to.
ready. Listen, I will say this. I fully agree. We've talked about this ad nauseum. There's a difference between being a campaigning politician and a governing politician, an elected official, right? And I think the challenge is that we collectively as human beings get caught up in the campaigning politician part and are like, well, I don't like the way she talks to the thing, or she gets mad, or she didn't come, and I'm like, what is this person delivering for the folks within their district or precinct or whatever? And what you start to see then is, oh man, that brings out voters, right?
Yeah.
So it no longer becomes an anti, it becomes a for,
Yeah.
right? So, and a for will always win.
Yeah, good.
Again, that's too hard for prediction. A for generally wins sometimes.
Yeah, there you go.
Contingent.
I like
Can
it.
I get another check mark?
Yeah.
You got to check. I'll put a green
All right,
check
good.
mark.
We got a small update
Yeah.
in the District 23 race. Brandon Herrera, Tony Gonzalez. Tony Gonzalez still has a heavy lead here tonight, but
There
that's
we
a
go.
look at the latest numbers. And our Courtney Friedman, she is covering this race for us. I believe she is standing by live to give us an update on things. She's joining us live from the Bexar County Elections
Representatives
Office.
on.
Hey, Courtney.
Oh yeah, we might get to 55.
All right, I
Uh-oh.
don't think we
We
have
don't
Courtney
have
right
someone
now.
yet.
There
There
we
she
go.
is.
Now we have you, Courtney.
Hey, Courtney.
There, you got me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think these numbers are very interesting. This is a very contentious race, and you guys talked about it earlier today on the live stream. I think the main point that we've all seen is the word non-traditional. It's interesting because you have the traditional candidate as Gonzalez, but he's only been there for a few years. So, I mean, you think about these long-standing Republican candidates that are backing him. You've got Governor Abbott, and then you have a newcomer, very different, very young, like Brandon Herrera, who kind of wants to mix everything up. So I just think it's funny, the comparison of traditional and non-traditional, seeing as how there's really not a lot of a gap. Their background's so different. Obviously, Steve, you saw this in your interviews with them, but also I reported at 6 that they basically said they could not be more different. And it's interesting to hear both candidates say that same exact thing. The other non-traditional thing we're seeing with this type of election, I'm here at the Bexar County Elections Office. This is strange. I'm not at a watch party. I'm not in an office. This is the first time I've covered elections, and neither candidate has gotten back to me with anything to say, no statement, no pre-numbers interview. Neither are having a watch party that I'm aware of. It's very interesting and very strange. I think this is kind of a turn, like you're saying, these platforms are very different. We know Herrera is, his platform is YouTube and other social media. He has tons of followers. So we'll be checking the YouTube to see if he responds to that. But I talked to his aide earlier today. today. She responded very quickly, but she said, we are not having a watch party and he won't be giving any comments tonight. So, I mean, I know in the newsroom we were kind of surprised by that. So I think this whole idea of non-traditional is really interesting, specifically in this race, because normally I would only be standing here if I were covering how the numbers are coming in or checking in with the team here.
You know, it's only right, though, in a non-traditional race like this that we have a non-traditional viewing parties. Or do we just have non-viewing parties? Maybe that's what we're having, non-viewing parties, part of the non-traditional race. Courtney, thanks. I appreciate that insight. So if we look back at these numbers that we have so far, if we can punch up District 23 again, I was trying to look at the exact total number that we have right now. Okay, so we've got, you know, about 12,000 votes, 13,000 votes. By the way, in the primary, there were about 47,000 votes that were cast in this district. Don't expect we're going to hit that this time, but gives us an idea of exactly where the numbers are right now with 42% reported.
And it's a runoff. Molly, you've talked about this. People, they aren't super jazzed typically to go out and vote in a runoff.
Well, and let's be like, just to be clear, we're like back to back to back to back elections right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a runoff, it's a primary, it's a runoff, it's a primary, it's a runoff, and like
let's
just
throw in the appraisal district.
and
for
then
fun.
let's an appraisal district runoff. I mean,
For fun. That's the first time those have ever been said in the same.
It's true.
then
Appraisal
hello,
district
summer.
for fun. I would say that particularly in a primary, voters are turtling.
Knew I wasn't going to live that one down.
Thank you. I think that there's like some, just some fatigue on that. You couple it with we've had some awful weather in Texas, right? So during last week's 1 week for early voting, right? So we're never going to see incredible numbers in runoffs generally, but just couple everything, it sort of compounds the nature of a runoff generally.
Absolutely.
And there's also sort of this nature, this feel of the incumbent, Democrat or Republican, it's anti-incumbent. Incumbent is a bad word. And you made the point earlier, people don't seem to be super excited to vote for someone, they're more excited to vote against.
Well, and to be fair, right, this is again, if we're going back to sort of the Greg Abbott effect. I don't know if that's a thing, and I'm trademarking it here.
It feels like it has been
It is.
since
It is.
March.
That's
Right,
fair.
right.
That's fair.
I would say, right, we're looking at a lot of incumbents, a lot of Republican incumbents that Greg Abbott came out specifically against and backed a different person losing.
That's unprecedented.
Losing. And I do think this actually speaks to not only long-term what's going to happen with vouchers, but separately what it means for thinking about the House Speaker, Dade Phelan. He is winning his runoff, and that was
We got
very
some new numbers for
Ken
that, too.
Paxton. Right, we're talking Dan Patrick. Ken Paxton backed the guy David Covey, and Greg Abbott sort of remained silent on this one. So we're seeing some like turmoil within. We knew that within the Republican
Well,
Party.
I will also add, if I can, usually when you're incumbent, you have more to attack. You have a voting record.
Oh,
you have
sure.
a history. So it's easier to go after incumbents versus someone brand new like Brandon. He doesn't have a voting record. He's brand new. He's just going to run.
Yeah.
So.
I will say that race tightening up, but it's still 57-43.
Right.
Yeah.
And even the Tony Gonzalez, Brandon Herrera race is tightening up, but it's still a lot to overcome.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
And usually, I mean, we've got the early vote in. This is, a 16 percentage point lead is going to be hard.
You want to be within 4. The margin of error is around 3 to 4.
Yeah.
And you can, with a Hail Mary, you can probably pull it out within 4, but that's where you want to be. Yeah.
So this is an interesting district to me and how it's changed. I know part of it was the way the maps have been redrawn, but it wasn't that long ago that this was a 50-50
Oh, yeah.
district.
Was this Pete Gallego?
Pete Gallego won
back in the day?
this district.
Yeah, it used to be a
Will
strong bid.
Will Hurd's old district.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Gina Ortiz-Jones almost beat Will Hurd
Yeah.
in this district.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
that way anymore.
It's not.
You think it's a safe Republican district?
I wouldn't call it safe. It's safer.
Okay.
Okay, it's still, when you look at congressional districts across the United States, it's still one of the ones that's relatively close to a toss-up. Okay, still within the margin of error kind of piece. It's not a given, but you eat your own.
Well, I think
process.
it would have been interesting. Again, I know nobody's calling it, but if Brandon Herrera had pulled this out, I think it definitely would have been a much harder battle in an election
Right.
for a
Than the
Republican to pull it
incumbent.
out so hard.
Yeah.
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 But I mean, Tony Gonzalez told me in our interview, I only know one way to run, and that's run scared.
Yeah.
And he said, I was hoping that I wouldn't have to go to a runoff. I really thought I wouldn't have to go to a runoff. I am in a runoff, so I'm doing everything I can to win it. And like I said, the Herrera people told me they expect to be outspent 10-1.
Yeah.
That's quite an advantage when you're an
Yeah.
incumbent.
It's a flaw in our system, but our congressional seats are on 2-year cycles.
Yeah.
So you're constantly running,
Constantly
you're
running.
constantly raising money, and then somewhere in between you're trying to govern.
Somewhere you're trying to pass something.
Yeah.
Pass
And
anything. Just
there's no
pass
spending.
anything.
There's no contribution limit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's-
Well, and it goes back to money as well. If we think about even coming locally, right? Rebecca Clay-Flores had infinitely more money than
Yeah.
It's
right.
2-1.
Right. So I'm like, if you follow the money, typically when somebody is spending the dollars, when somebody has the cash to spend, they are going to have the game that needs to push forward. That's
and this is probably getting into the minutia a little bit, but I did.
we're on a live stream about runoff. You're fine. Minutia away.
Yeah, exactly.
So
If there's ever a time.
I think Amanda raised about 31,000, right? And out of that 31,000, I did see a lot of expenditures on staff,
Yeah.
right? And so something for all of you that want to run, and there's something called burn rate, right? And you want to make sure you manage that burn rate. By the time you get out the vote time, you want to make sure you have enough money there to pay your walkers, to put more mailers out. And I saw there was a lot of money spent on just staff, just having people around.
Before you
doing-
got to get out the vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't want to say it causing it, but that's when you don't have money to spend, you can't reach voters.
Yeah. Let's take a look at some updated numbers for Allen Schoolcraft, John Kemple.
Thanks for
I
allowing me to
believe
talk about
those
minutia.
have just come in. If we
We
could
like
pull
your
that
minutia.
graphic up. And
Yeah,
we
that's
still,
44. There we go.
okay, so within 10 now.
But still, 57% reporting. I mean, it's
That's 10.
about 1,100 votes between the two.
Yeah.
This is, of course, we're talking about Seguin, part of New Braunfels, kind of Guadalupe County, Comal County.
And we still haven't heard from these two candidates. So you want to take a minute to actually hear parts of your interview from them a little bit earlier.
Good call.
There's been folks trying to talk me into running for the last 6 or 8 years. And I kept saying no, no, let someone else do it. I've done it before, I've served my time. And I just kept saying no, but this time around, there were just issues that I really cared about. And then I think the final one was the school choice vote, when my opponent was one of the 21 Republicans that helped kill it. And I just said, okay, that's it. I'm going to try to do my part.
I think that's the defining difference between both of us. I'm supporting a system that we can see from other states and that just doesn't work. Just from a basic economic standpoint, the cost of it would be debilitating for my communities, my schools, our local economies, and I'm just not going to stand for it and watch it go.
I think that is a big question with the school voucher issue. It's less about choice and more about cost. What is it going to cost the public education system? And we talked about how this is a numbers game. The governor trying to line up a legislature that would pass this, but you all know a little bit more about the political process. If the numbers pan out, does this mean school vouchers passes in Texas, or there's a lot of ground to cover before we get there?
Look, it'll always be a fight. What you will probably hear after this is the smaller counties who rely on public school districts and the jobs that those provide are going to start screaming.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
they have.
And they have.
Those rural districts.
Those rural districts,
They have
okay,
been the
they're-
ones
You got
that
it.
stood against this for decades.
So while here on runoff election night, the governor is winning his fight for vouchers. He's still going to have to go through the legislative battle, and
Right.
a number of those that said, "Yeah, I'm for you," may change their tune once they're actually in office. Okay, so there'll still be a fight, but if I had to guess, based on how close it came last time,
Yeah.
you want me to predict something? I predict we have a voucher. in
I want to
this
ask Kevin something. So there was an argument that was it Covey? If he won, he would basically act as like, say, a Dan Patrick, where he would be more involved in the legislature and the bills. So do you think Phelan, if he does pull it off, will he be like in a position where he can kind of block some of that, or kind of be more involved with what passes and what doesn't?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, if it's like taking out, or it's the opposite of this. I was saying taking out your star quarterback. Okay. Essentially, the governor needed a number of individual legislative seats in order to get to the votes that he needed, and all things considered equal, he wanted his quarterback.
Sure.
As the speaker. So what I was talking about earlier, the legislative battle the governor's still going to have to go through, that battle is going to run through Phelan.
Sean Payton in Denver.
Well, I would also we should be talking. We should be talking about also, on top of the rest of it, the notion that this is a primary and a runoff, right? So the ways that primaries and runoffs operate is so your fringe voters are that's who's talking about voting, right? Like a person who is like, but school vouchers will change my life. That's who's voting, not your regular election voters. And those are the folks who are like, okay, the people have been selected and I will go out and choose the candidate from one side or the other, basically, right?
These are your 4-4s. They vote in every single election for the party that they choose.
Right. So there is a conversation to be had around, well, just because they're winning these primary runoffs, it doesn't, now we move into a regular election. And I think that's where you start to see rural folks coming out and saying, no, this will not work,
But isn't
potentially.
Does that work in a district like 44, though? Do you think that a Democrat in 44 has a chance when it's been 40 years plus of Republican control?
No.
That's now where it may work, maybe, even though that district's been redrawn a little bit, does it work in Steve Allison's old district?
121.
With Alamo Heights and kind of
Potentially.
things like that. Does the voucher issue become the center point of that campaign?
I think now we're going to start talking about the difference between how Republicans and Democrats run elections. And Democrats are so bad at it. Like, they're just so bad at elections. Like, they don't. Republicans are so good at, these are our 4 things, and speak about those 4 things and don't say anything other than those 4 things. And then Democrats are like, I don't know, are we electing people? Like, that's when you're trying, that's my scientific data analysis. You're welcome. But I do think that there's something to be said for that, because in something like this, where it's very serious, where you have to go in hard on like almost cherry picking smaller races that maybe you might have a potential margin of error space, it has to be such a major ground game. And I don't know that the Democrats have it.
So I was operating in 121 after Joe Strauss vacated. And at the time, there was effectively no Democrats because they had all voted for Joe Strauss for years, for 10 years or so. We had to rebuild that base there.
Selena Montoya.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I think a couple of years ago, that district was almost a toss-up, 50-50, until we redistricted again, right? I think we're going to see a swing back from, when you're in the primaries, you go, who's more Republican than I? Like, who's gonna fall off the ledge on the right?
Right.
But I think in the general, you're going to find that swing back a little bit. But I don't know with the candidate that they're running on the Democratic side is strong enough. Maybe so, because if it's an Allison, absolutely not. But maybe a LaHood, there may be a chance for a Democrat to get a little closer in that seat.
And don't forget what just happened in Northeast Independent School District.
That's right.
Okay, it's the opposite of the LaHoods of the world, and that's right in the middle of 121.
Right, and that's what I mean. In talking to both John Kemple and Steve Allison, which we have done in these races, both of them said, "Listen, I've got Alamo Heights in my district. I've got Seguin and smaller school districts in my district. I am standing up for them, and if I lose, that this is what I believe in. But it was also interesting talking to John Kemple because he brought up the fact that he's good friends with Lyle Larson.
Yeah.
And he seems to think that Republicans, like himself, like Lyle Larson, are an endangered species.
Absolutely.
Because they vote their, in his words, vote their convictions, not necessarily what's going to keep them in office.
He's absolutely right. I mean, look, we've been here a while. You go back 10 years and you ask, who's one of the most conservative legislatures? You'd say Lyle Larson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Today, you know, he's barely a rhino.
Yeah.
Okay. Same thing with John.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those two were birds of a feather. They were true, traditional, conservative Republicans that everybody knew were really, really conservative.
Yeah.
Okay. Today, they don't have a place.
I still think though, and Myra knows this because I've opined to her before about it. I cannot wrap my head around the concept of calling somebody a liberal Republican, especially somebody like John Kemple,
Yes.
who is for build a wall, who is for all these things that are bread and butter Republican, but he's getting labeled a liberal because he didn't vote for school vouchers.
Yeah.
And and it's just there are certain things that just boggle my mind when we're throwing out these terms that to me seem absurd.
That's what it goes back to the ever-changing science of how you run for office. It has nothing to do with whether or not the person's going to be good at governing.
Yeah.
Or qualified.
Or qualified.
Well, like Molly said, you know, for Republicans, if you have 4 issues, it's where are you on these 4 issues?
Yeah.
Are you on our team or not on our team?
Yeah.
But we've talked about that's happening with Democrats too. There's this trend of you either fit this mold that we would like you to fit in or you don't.
No, right now on the Democratic side, you're kind of finding out after you make a mistake, you find out, oh crap, I made a mistake. You find out after the fact, after you lose your election, oh, that's what happened.
Well, and I think even on the Republican side, we're thinking about what we're seeing right now coming out in results is school vouchers is like that thing right now. You can vote, what we saw is voting lockstep with the Republican Party and hey, I don't think school vouchers is the route. And it's like, no, you're not a Republican.
Here's one of the reasons vouchers was easy.
Bathroom bill.
Vouchers is an easy political topic because it's almost a yes or no question.
Sure.
Do you want to be able to send your kids to private school and get paid? Yes or no?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not real controversial.
Right.
Okay. Compared to immigration.
Well, sure.
Compared to some of the other things.
Well, which is why we sort of try to dumb these things down to like yes or no's, right? So saying school choice or we give it for parents need a choice. It's like, y'all.
We talked about
sells.
how school
Right,
vouchers may not be top of mind for most voters, but Republicans in Texas are hanging their hat on that issue.
Yeah.
Have we seen that before when one of those core issues is one that most voters aren't talking about?
The bathroom bill.
The bathroom bill.
Bathroom bill.
Joe Strauss.
Bathroom bill.
But yeah, Joe Strauss absolutely, standing strong against the bathroom bill that
Let's
made
talk
it did
about
not happen. And
real
that's-
things
and that's
that
why-
matter.
That's why Dade Phelan's kind of getting targeted in the same way.
Right.
I just, it's fascinating to me to see even people in this state that not so long ago you kind of considered a moderate. There was a time where maybe Greg Abbott was even actually considered a moderate attorney general.
Yeah.
He was in favor of the SHIELD law, with SHIELD journalists from having to give up their sources.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he's probably in favor of that now, but I mean, it's interesting the evolution of really both parties, but since the Republican Party's in power in the state of Texas, it's interesting to see that evolution play out. And I'm curious what this means for people like
From Eddie.
John Kemple, from people like, Lyle Larson, from people, Steve Allison. Like, where do they go now?
Yeah.
Like the Kevin Wolfs.
Yeah.
Where do they go
Consulting.
now?
Consulting. They become consultants.
Well,
Yes.
I will say this.
Hey, go get a real job.
I will say this. And this is what I'm so proud about the show Common Ground.
Yeah.
Because there is a fight for the middle. There's a fight. There's bridge builders that we need to train, need to grow in this community, that can be able to not only not compromise your values, but at least be able to be pragmatic about issues and about what really matters to voters. And I think we keep allowing these parties to rip each other apart once somebody's in the middle. There is a group of folks that are fighting for that. I know Joe Strauss is focused on that, is trying to really focus on candidates that are about good governance, fiscal responsibility.
My biggest fear, though, DeMonte, is that the citizens are hard to change and hard to get them involved until they suffer real pain.
I agree.
And you know, how far does that pendulum have to swing before the middle wakes up and says, "Okay, enough of this foolishness. We got to get back involved." You know, we're running out the Johns of the world, we're running out the Louds, we're running out the Joes, blah 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 on the Republican side. Good governance people.
Well, you know what the ironic thing about all this? The majority of people are undecided. They're in the middle. That's the majority.
Yes.
When you're running a campaign, that's what the fight is for, the middle, right? And so the way you win that middle is in a battle of messaging. It's a campaign of their messaging, and are you connecting with them, and are you leading them to the vote that you need from them?
But
And
it seems like there's not a lot of messaging directed towards the middle.
I was going to point to Molly's point about some parties do it better than others, right?
Well, I also don't know that I'm fully in agreement with where this is going as a conversation. So I think in general, the way in which we have set up governance and voting and our election system is so fundamentally flawed that people sort of bow out. Those who are, I would say I want to be precise in language. Folks who have transportation and access to internet and know who's running and can get time off that's paid and get to an election and are just like, no thank you, that's a very specific set of voters. Then there are folks who have no access to internet or can't get into a transportation, have no time off, can't figure out who is running or why or how, right? So we've made elections so difficult to maneuver that then we're like, okay, well, if voting's not the thing, then you have to get involved in some other ways, which also takes a lot of time. It's just a way in which we've sort of made it incredibly difficult to participate in the ways in which policies that affect us every day are made. And then we grouse about it, right? Not generally about voter turnout or who got elected or which person got the most money or how did a runoff happen. And I do think that there's a component to this that is a fundamental flaw in the way that we put people into office to govern for all of us.
Well, I think two things can exist at once. I do believe in the message and how you structure a campaign, how you build your message, you go with those voters. But I do agree with you as well.
Yes. I'm like
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm like
We're
a
in
comms,
agreement.
yes,
We're in agreement.
because I'm like, hey, as a comms professional, you do have to know how to say the thing that you want, which is why school choice is for a voucher.
Right.
It's so smart.
But it's, I mean, and that's why you got to call them vouchers, because Texas already has school choice.
Of course it does.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's why, I mean, it's a great communication tool if you're in favor of vouchers
Absolutely.
to say school choice, but
you
it's
want-
also not necessarily
Well, no, it's
accurate.
factually inaccurate.
Yeah.
Yes, agreed. And I think that's part of the challenge is that how you message something and how it gets picked up in the lexicon.
When is being factually inaccurate when you're running for office?
Because Democrats don't believe in God.
I don't
That's
know.
never
I'm
happened.
just saying.
Let's go through the numbers again, and I think we might just wrap this up, because it seems to me like most of these races
Yeah,
are
the
decided.
key races that we've been watching.
This one keeps getting closer. It's 57-43
Yeah. I
with
said
43% reporting.
That's it.
Like I said, keeps getting closer and closer. This is District 28, another one that we've kind of been watching. It looks like Jay Furman is going to win
barely
this
got
Republican
close.
runoff. District 35, Stephen Wright, 53-47. This is very close, though, with just 19% reporting. This is Dade Phelan and David Covey. It's getting tighter with
Okay,
64%.
there's a couple of oohs over here from the power panel.
We didn't do that one.
We didn't do that
We
one.
didn't do that one.
We didn't do that one.
Oh,
but
we
it's,
didn't predict that one?
They were wrong though.
I mean, this is less than 1,000 votes
Yeah.
right now
Yeah.
that are separating these two gentlemen.
Okay,
Schoolcraft
Al,
Kempel's still saying at 10%.
Yeah.
Rebecca's still there.
This is
Oh, that's Henry
State
Cuellar's,
Board
yeah.
District 80, and
Henry
this
Cuellar's
was
sister.
Yeah, Rosie Cuellar is
Henry-
Henry Cuellar's sister, correct?
Yes.
This was the Uvalde area. This is an interesting race to see. A lot of people were curious how Henry Cuellar's sister would do in that district, and she's losing the Democratic runoff right now.
DCCC got involved.
Bear
Yeah.
County Commissioner
Okay.
Precinct 1, again, this is still early voting, but the
no
incumbent
election.
64-36.
Yeah.
A huge hill for Dr. Amanda Gonzalez to make up.
Yeah, not a lot of questions about that race.
All right, so I think we're good to wrap up this live
think
stream
we're good?
for tonight. I do.
You sure?
I want your guys' final thoughts on what you've seen tonight, your takeaways, and how you feel about it.
I'm not ready yet.
You're not ready to go home?
I'll
What
start.
happened?
That too.
So, the tired saying, all politics is local. There's still some of that.
Yeah.
Okay, look at Rebecca's race. Look at the early vote on the Bull Mountain Bigelow race. Okay, but if you can get your message correctly, if you get some heavy hitters like the governor of the world and even the president, and they can swing some things. Okay, you couple that with the extremes on both sides gaining more and more traction and controlling the message. You end up coming out of primaries with questionable folks.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is a little depressing, and going back to something I said earlier, sooner or later that middle piece is going to feel enough pain that they'll step in more, and we'll stop driving off the. I said it in one of our other shows, the rational candidates, the rational electeds that are there to actually try to govern, not stand on some parade and make a bunch of noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're seeing people moving rather than rational, right? You're seeing folks moving into that space. So I think what we saw tonight is Greg Abbott had a good night.
Yeah.
He'll be happy with the way that this turned out, and coming back to what it means for you locally is school vouchers will be in the legislature if this goes forward, and how does that affect your local public school district? And I think part of that conversation has to come super, super hyper local, or we lose it in comms and taglines and election nonsense, as opposed to will this affect the school down my street? And that'll be an interesting one to watch as we move into the election. I think now that we're getting into we've got one more runoff, right? Just one more before we get into election season, before we go to November.
I think so.
I think it's just one more for the appraisal district. Get your vote out.
Yeah. We will not be doing a live stream, by the way, for the appraisal district.
If you are,
I can let you know right now.
So
do
mad
not
about-
set your calendars
I
for
have
that
a
one
full
because it's not
hour
gonna
set
happen.
aside for the appraisal district runoff.
I'm making.
I'm going to bring my taxes in, and we're all just going to talk about it.
You know what? Do it. I love it. I love it.
So I think that's it. So I think we can, now we're going to sort of turn our attention to what does November bring us, and what beyond November, because I do think that we have gotten sort of hung up on the election is the thing, and we know that that's not the case, right? The policies that are affecting our everyday lives happen post-election.
That's why I like going last, because I usually don't have to say anything after these two brilliant
Just
folks.
bless on it.
Yeah, I agree with everything they said, and I think what I'm happy to see is that the folks who are doing their jobs keeps their seat.
Yeah.
And say what you want about Dade Phelan, but the implications of him not being there and what happens to the state is I can't think what the state would look like if that happened. But I will leave with this: is that I'm going to be one of those people that always fight for common ground, always be pragmatic about policy, about how our community works, about these issues. And so happy to be here with y'all. Thank y'all for the opportunity to be here.